Hello and welcome to Showdown. We're going to discuss issues with the panel shortly, but first let me just set the scene, I suppose, for where we're going here. We're going to traverse matters particularly economic and the United States election. Obviously we'll have a little bit of a discussion about where the Royal Commission discussion is at as well, but it's pretty easy to talk about the US election result in the same breath as the economy, because the so-called fiscal cliff, which is fast approaching, is something which the United States is obviously right at the centre of. Whether Barack Obama, or indeed had he won the election, Mitt Romney, was the right person to face that particular task, I guess we'll never know. But it is Barack Obama that is facing it as we speak, and the weeks and the months leading up to it are now befronting us. Now, where does Australia sit in this? Well, we'll talk to our panel here shortly at the Sky News Centre, but let me just bring in, as he's known on Twitter, the kook, Stephen Koukoulas. So that's not even how you pronounce it, is it, Stephen? Welcome to the program.
Koukoulas, Peter, but pretty good.
Koukoulas. Before we even get to matters economic, can I just ask you, I met you for the first time at The Nation the other week, and you're a rational, easy to talk to bloke, but when the title The Kook comes out on Twitter, you're a bit out there.
Oh, look, I like to call things as I see them. One of the things that I get very frustrated about is when people don't talk facts. You might be critical of me for my opinions and my biases and judgments and all the rest of it, but I'm yet to find anyone who's pointed out factual errors in what and the basis of what I'm saying. And when people sort of talk rubbish about government debt and those sort of things, I try to call them out on it.
Well, what's your view then on the situation in the United States? You've often on Twitter in particular talked about the fact that in the US the debt problem is much more significant than here, despite what our political leaders, certainly on the coalition side of the benches, tell us. How serious is it what they're facing over there in the lead up to this so-called fiscal cliff?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things there. First of all is that the fiscal cliff is the ending of a whole bunch of tax cuts and some spending programs kick in. So it's worth about 4.5% of GDP from the 1st of January. So the US economy is only growing at a little over 2% now. So if you get a sort of a cold turkey fiscal cut on the 1st of January, you're going to go into recession. I think that would be fairly clear if nothing happens. So that's the first point. Within that, and this is where the problem in the Congress is going to come, because we do have a situation where the US public debt is 84% of GDP as we sit here now, and something has to be done about it. It's really high. It's higher than Spain. It's a horribly large number, and I guess this is the issue that we saw during the campaign from Romney and Obama, is how to get this level of debt to stabilise in the first instance, and then to get it to start to fall over many, many years. And that's the problem. Is it spending cuts? Is it tax increases? Or some sort of combination of the two, gently phased in, not coming on the 1st of January with the fiscal cliff.
All right, range of issues there. Let me introduce the panel and bring them in on each of those. Sitting closest to me, Liberal member for Bradfield, Paul Fletcher. Welcome to the show, as always. Thank you. Dr. David Smith from the US Study Centre. I remember you from debating days. Good to see you. How are you going?
12, 13 years.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure I used to wipe the floor with you every time. But that's another debate. We'll discuss that another time. And Rosalind Wells, now you had a crack at me on Twitter for not having enough women on my show. In a sense, I proved you right again here tonight, other than getting your good self on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Peter. I was too polite to bring that up.
Yeah, I'm not too polite. All right, let's start with the politics of what the kook just had to say. A person to come to is clearly you, Paul Fletcher. It is the opposition, of which you're obviously part, that has, as he would put it, he may not have just then, but as he would generally put it, beating up the level of debt in this country, certainly versus what's happening in other parts of the world. How do you respond to that?
Well, look, this is one of the arguments that you always see being made by Labor parliamentarians, by Greens and by plenty of others who say, oh yes, look, we accept as a general principle that it's important that you keep debt under control, but Australia's debt to GDP ratio now is low, so look, that's fine, let's abandon spending discipline, let's not really worry about that. The key point is this: as the US demonstrates, as Europe demonstrates, the political discipline that is required year after year to avoid getting into the position that the US is now in, that a number of countries in Europe are now in, that's not something you can do overnight. And it's very easy to let the discipline slip. And what we've seen over the last 5 years of the Rudd-Gillard Labor government is that the discipline went out the window the moment government changed. And it's all very well to say, look, we're only 5 years in, it's fine, debt to GDP is low. Let's remember there was accumulated about $30 billion in the positive when we left government. The debt is now well over, going to be about $170 billion, 4 huge deficits in a row. Very likely this year will be another deficit. So the point is, at a point in time, it might sound like a reasonable proposition to say, let's not worry about budget discipline. But the politics of it, you've got to stay vigilant about it. And that is one thing that our side of politics has the credibility on, budgetary management. And what we're seeing in the US and in Europe is this is what happens when the chickens come home to roost. And it's very, very hard then to manage the politics of it when you get to that position and you've got a huge debt.
All right, look, just quickly, Stephen, if I could just get a response. You say you like to talk facts. It is a fact, isn't it, that even though our debt to GDP is low, it has accelerated at a not dissimilar rate to what has happened in other parts of the world from what was originally a lower base.
No, it's only gone from a net asset position of 3% of GDP to a deficit of 10. So it's only a 13 percentage point move of GDP.
More than threefold increase, though. That's a 3 times increase.
No, well, the starting point for the other countries has gone from 50 to 80, so it's a much bigger blowout. Look, the point about fiscal discipline and all the rest of it, look, the critical issue in the MyEFO, and I'm assuming that the Liberal Party will support the efforts to trim back some of the expenditure, but as the MyEFO stands, in 2012-13, we've got the biggest cut in government spending ever recorded in Australia's history. We just spoke about the US fiscal cliff. In Australia, we've got a contraction in government spending of 3.1% of GDP, not far shy of the US effort. Now, that's one reason why the RBA has been cutting interest rates, and there's a whole lot of myriad of issues associated with it. But we've got a big cut in government spending. Spending to GDP ratio in 2012-13 will be below the average of the Howard government's 12 budget. So to say that this is a big spending government is not correct. It's not factually supported by budget documents.
All right, I just want to move across to the US if I can for a sec and bring you in, Dr. Smith. Now, you know, US politics is your shtick. You've been on Sky regularly in the lead up to the election. How much did this so-called fiscal cliff feature in voting intentions, do you think, amongst US citizens as they made their way to ballot stations?
Oh, almost not at all. This was hardly mentioned in the campaign. There was stuff about taxation and spending mentioned, yes, but this particular issue of the fiscal cliff, no one wanted to raise that after what the US went through in July last year.
Why not? Is that because the solution is sort of an unpalatable electoral thing? Or?
That's right. I mean, the solution was designed just to get the US through to the next election. No politician wanted to remind the American people of the part that they had had in that unsavoury solution, which now confronts both the President and the Congress now. So they didn't figure it all. There were certainly different visions in play about how to actually reduce the deficit, with Obama saying it has to involve some kind of taxation on the very rich. The Republicans saying, no, we can basically do it without even touching Medicare. We can do it by targeting unpopular spending. And both of them are a little bit in fantasy land.
But in terms of economic management, correct me if I'm wrong, but generally speaking, and it did vary from some states to states, but overall, from what I could see, Mitt Romney was regarded as the slightly better economic manager than Barack Obama.
That
Correct?
was because he had the challenger's luxury of being incredibly vague about what he actually wanted to do.
And not being the incumbent,
Yes,
granted, at the
yeah,
same
not
time.
being the incumbent. Obama had to talk about what he'd actually done. Mitt Romney could just say in debates, look, I'm going to create 7 million
But here's
jobs.
my question off the back of that. That being the case, if he has that sort of so-called advantage, founded poorly or otherwise,
yes,
why wouldn't he then try to bring up the fiscal cliff and, in a sense, scare voters into what was just on the horizon and, as a result, therefore, hopefully scare more people into his side?
The problem comes back to his party, and his party was the problem for him the entire campaign. A lot of people blamed the July crisis on the Republicans. They may have both been equally responsible, but more people blamed the Republicans than the Democrats. Mitt Romney didn't want to associate himself with what a lot of people saw as a disgraceful Republican effort last July to actually hold the country's credit for ransom. That's why he wasn't going to bring the fiscal cliff up.
Rosalind, you used to work at DFAT, not that
That's
that
right.
necessarily is related to this answer, or this question I should say, but Obama or Mitt Romney, did you have a favourite that you were cheering for?
Oh, absolutely. I was on Team Obama from the get-go.
Did you think he was going to win, or were you getting nervous, particularly after debate one?
Yeah, absolutely. He completely blew that debate, as we all saw. And, you know, Romney had a good debate. So I think, you know, as it's been well commented on, that was the turning point in the campaign. That's when Romney got his momentum back. And
Would he have got over the line without the hurricane, do you think? Is that too cynical? You're nodding, Dr.
He
Smith.
absolutely would have.
Yeah, but I think the margin might have been less. I think it was definitely a benefit to Obama, and you know, it just basically knocked Romney off the airwaves in that sort of crucial last few days, and there really wasn't a lot he could do about it. It just looked crass to be campaigning while people were losing their homes and dealing with that kind of devastation. So that was, you know, an amazing gift, really.
Dr. Smith, why are you so certain that he still would have gotten over the line, Barack Obama?
The people who were examining the averages of the polls said that about 2 weeks before the hurricane, the polls had turned back around. Mitt Romney's momentum had completely stopped. Hurricane Sandy might have got Obama Florida, potentially, but everywhere else, in every other swing state, he was back in front by that time. And he was back in front in the national polls too, if you remove the national polls from the averages that were egregiously wrong. So he was back in front by the time that Hurricane Sandy hit. It was just the icing on the cake for him.
Paul Fletcher, quick question. I mean, you're a moderate within the Liberal Party, generally speaking. I think that's fair. Why do Liberals in this country so readily identify with the Republicans in the US? If you sort of pick a horse, Labor tends to go with the Democrats, Liberals tend to go with the Republicans. It strikes me that Republicans in the US are, broadly speaking, much further to the right because the US is further to the right. And apart from some issues, a lot of Liberals, and I would have thought a moderate Liberal like you, would more readily identify with Democrats rather than Republicans, surely.
Well, look, I think on the natural alignment of the political spectrum, there's an obvious fit between centre-right parties in one country and in another. Now, you can have the debate about where exactly on the spectrum the Republicans are right now. Are they centre-right or have they moved a bit further to the right? But I think the other thing is that the presidential campaign is one where you make an assessment of the qualities of the individual candidates. What is certainly a difference between the US system and our system is that the party structure is somewhat less significant. You know, at one extreme, the US parties are almost brands for hire. If you turn up as a candidate, you've got a credible record, you say you can demonstrate you can raise the money, then they'll let you have the brand. And you go through a contested process of primaries to say, hey, I'm the person who's entitled to have the brand for this election. So I think if you were there as a voter, you know, you'd be making an assessment of the individual capacities of the candidates.
You must think that the Tea Party are crazy, though. I mean, you must echo Wayne Swan's views on that at least, surely.
Well, what I would say is I think we are actually very fortunate as a nation that we're not going to find ourselves in the exquisite diplomatic difficulties that we would be facing if Swanee, you know, had made the extraordinary comments that he made about a major political party.
But that doesn't make him wrong. I mean, you must agree that there's some pretty radical elements of the Tea Party.
I think it made his comments really quite curious as a thing for a senior minister in an Australian government to say about an election in one of our most important allies. He was certainly, I think, taking a risk in terms of the nature of our relationship with the US had the Republicans got in. But look, my own assessment would be Romney was a very capable candidate with an impressive track record as governor of Massachusetts, the work he did in Salt Lake City on the Olympics and so on, his business track record.
You don't need to suck up to him now. He's a has-been. Don't worry about him.
The point I'm simply making is that you make an assessment on the calibre of the candidates as well as on the party labels.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a commercial break. Just very quickly, though, David, is it true that Sky News crimped your style and you've been told you have to put your hair in a ponytail if you want to come on set?
There was a disastrous interview once where, because of the angling of the camera...
You've got to live and let be yourself.
My face wasn't visible for an entire interview because of this side of my hair. So,
well, we don't want to cramp your style on Showdown. During the break, I want you to take that ponytail out, I think. Well, unless you don't want me to be telling you what to do as opposed to Sky.
Hair on sets.
All right, we're going to take a commercial break. Keeping it highbrow here on Showdown. Back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Showdown, where we've chiefly been discussing the United States election as well as economic issues broadly in this nation and also, of course, that so-called fiscal cliff in the US. Dr. Smith, let me ask you, US election, where to from here for Barack Obama? I mean, what can he do to avoid himself falling into the trap that so many second-term presidents fall into, which is becoming a lame duck president?
I think that he has to get stuff done in the first 2 years. That lame duckness really, really kicks in the second 2 years of the term. And I think that there are a few things that he can realistically pursue that will cement his agenda. One of them is obviously bedding down healthcare reform, but another one is comprehensive immigration reform. This is a long-term democratic aim. It's something that he felt he couldn't do politically in the first term, but there will be never a better chance than in the next 2 years to get that done, while there are a lot of discussions going on in the Republican Party about what they need to do to try to get the Latino vote back. The Republican Party has realised that basically outsourcing its immigration policy to the lunatics in the vigilante wing of the Arizona branch has turned away in droves Latino voters who actually might have been up for grabs. So if Obama pushes for comprehensive immigration reform now or within the next 2 years, I don't think he's going to face a lot of opposition from the Republican Party.
Do you agree?
That is a major thing he can do.
Do you agree with that, Rosalind?
Yeah, I do, actually. And I think it was also interesting that...
It's also an opportunity, sorry to interrupt, but it's also an opportunity, though, potentially for the Republicans to pull themselves out of their quagmire by supporting it, isn't it?
And they need to. But I thought it was interesting in Obama's victory speech that he flagged climate change towards the end as an issue that he wanted to address. And to me, that signalled that he's also looking to be much more of an internationalist in his foreign policy as well. You know, we all know, you know, there's been the Asia pivot, and he is a multilateralist. But I thought that was interesting that he was identifying that issue, and that will obviously require a lot of international cooperation. So yeah, I totally agree with David about healthcare and immigration reform, and that also sort of consolidates the Democrats' edge over the Republicans, because certainly on immigration that was an electoral disadvantage for them. They alienated large blocks of the electorate.
Yep, no doubt about
needlessly, and I think Obama will be wanting to capitalise on that.
Let me bring you in, Stephen. Sorry to have left you sitting there in a dark, cold Canberra. But quick question. You know, going back to what Paul Fletcher had to say, in a sense, you know, you've worked at senior levels for the Gillard government. It was a bit of a thank God for that, wasn't it, in a sense, that Obama won, because Deputy Prime Minister Wayne Swan, Treasurer Wayne Swan, having to deal with Vice President Ryan, I'm getting that right, I don't know, everything goes in one ear and out the other, Ryan, given some of his, you know, sort of positions on the economy that match up with what Swan was so critical of, that would have been highly, highly embarrassing for the government.
I don't know if it was embarrassing or would have been embarrassing. It would have been awkward, let's say, because you know, there's a very different agenda about how the economy and fiscal position is going to be repaired under the Romney-Ryan plan versus Obama-Biden plan. So in a sense, that was the difficulty, and I think that's what the Deputy Prime Minister and Treasurer Swan was trying to say. You know, I think what Obama's got, if I can just sort of have a little bit of a go here, because I think the issue for Obama, from an economic perspective, if by 2016 he can get the budget almost to balance over the next 4 years, if he can get unemployment to 6% or a bit lower, and if he can do that while still growing the economy at sort of 3%-ish for the US, that would be a pretty good economic achievement, and it would give whoever is the new Democrat nominee in 2016 something to run on then.
All right, Stephen, we are out of time, unfortunately. Thanks for joining us out of Canberra. Great to have you on the program.
Pleasure.
Rosalind Wells, thanks for your appearance as well. Good to have you. Dr. Stephen Smith, hopefully I can have you again, as you know, election might be out of the way, but always lots to talk about in the US, particularly with the fiscal cliff approaching. And of course, as always, Paul Fletcher, thanks for joining us on Showdown.